work we do. Grade 2, our national identity culture, and then grade 3 is the movement around the world. And I didn't find a lot of like exact definitions of what they mean by that, but that's kind of like the general idea of the standards for the early grades. So here is, how some of the challenges, just like what you mentioned, no? Like, for example, what should we include in the curriculum, no? Because there's so many things to teach about social studies, right? Another one that came from the Cohen, Kamenui, and Herman book is that what's happening too with social studies is that in elementary school, we kind of like give like a very quick brush on it. And then suddenly in middle school, you have to learn like everything in 1 year. You know, for example, American history from the Mayans all the way to the moon landing in 1 year. And that's social studies. No? So there's no other country, in fact, based on what their research is, that does that. That teaches a lot of facts in 1 year, and then hardly anything in elementary schools. No? So we have.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a place where, because I was actually thinking about some of this stuff earlier this week, is in other countries, how do they do this? And is there places where we can find some of that information and get some ideas from them on maybe how to do it better?
Yeah, sure. I was looking at a study that they did, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And one of the, for example, we talk about Japan, right? Japan having really strong outcomes, academic outcomes. And one of the things they do is, instead of trying to cover everything every year, like we tend to do here, we always want to cover everything every year, they kind of get in depth. They get very deep into specific topics. And so, for example, if you're going to talk about community, you really delve into community, and that's what you do, maybe throughout a couple of years or 3 years. Now, if you're going to be talking about the world, and countries, and you kind of like delve into that. And so it's not like here that we always kind of seem to like repeat things, because we think that it builds right on what kids know before. But what happens is that we're just always kind of like just brushing lightly on something because they won't remember. They probably won't remember what they've learned the year before. So you just reteach it, but you don't have time to reteach it in there. So you teach a little bit, and you hope that the next grade, the teachers will pick up from that and keep teaching it. But so we're kind of like always being very superficial in the knowledge, and I think that that's what other countries are not doing. Yeah. I think Finland is another example where they also get much deeper into specific content than we do here. Yeah. If you look, for example, at the National Council for Social Studies, this is what they think should be taught in social studies. So it's, again, just like we were talking about, a large list, and then how do you make connections from one thing to the other, and when do you teach it, in which grade? And so those are the things that are very hard to social studies, because we kind of expect a lot and want to teach everything, and then we end up not teaching kind of anything, in depth. So, and then on top of, that's why I liked, I don't know what you think, but I like the standards that Nevada put for social studies, because it's like very kind of like specific for each grade. Now, some of the issues is the disciplinary skills, that go with each of those content, community or knowing about the world. And these are the disciplinary skills that the standards in Nevada indicate. If you read them, what strikes you as what do you think about this disciplinary skills? What are they? Thinking. Critical thinking.
Evidence and drawing conclusions and backing it up with your evidence.
Exactly. So always going back to the evidence. Yeah, backing it up. But what is it that you need if you have to do that? Cover standards. What is it that you need?
Well, the language.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. You need a lot of academic language. I mean, that's the only way you're going to be able to, develop questions, answer questions, provide evidence, be persuasive, take action. Right. We need language. Yeah. And if you look, for example, in second grade, this is what they have. Like the disciplinary skills, and then the standards. And second grade still is with prompting and support, generate compelling questions, explore national identity and culture. This comes from the second grade, but still very vague, right? I mean, what is compelling question and what is a supporting question and how does that work, no? But what I wanted to point out is that it's so much academic language with social studies, right? I mean, it's almost like that's the basis for it, you know?
Gone on for several minutes and had very rich language, but we didn't hear it because the video's been edited.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to condense everything, no?
Yeah.
And it's tricky, it's very hard, yeah. Okay, so let's move on here. Okay, so now we're going to move into the components of effective instruction. It kind of it's a little bit like we're talking about the review, and in social, particularly in social studies. No, and so here are the basic overarching principles, and some of you have mentioned it already. We're going to see illustrated in another video too, and we saw it here. But how come it went? Okay. Oh, okay. So big ideas in social studies, and so conspicuous strategies, mediated scaffolding, strategic integration, building background knowledge, and judicious review. And we're going to go through each of them and with a specific example. But and I want to start with the big ideas for social studies. No, so what is a big idea, right? And a big idea is usually an important concept, principle that helps the learner organize and interrelate and apply the information to make meaningful connections between topics, between the topic and the reality, and between the topic and the real life of the students. No, and so one of the easiest ways to think about big ideas is with reading, right? Like when you attended the workshop by Dr. Hagan, no, it was big ideas in reading are which ones? What are the big ideas in reading? Phonemic awareness, comprehension, phonics, right? Fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, right? Those are the big ideas. And what we know that is that in any language, if we can master phonemic awareness and phonics and fluency, and then we know a lot of vocabulary and comprehension, we can read, you know? I mean, that goes across languages, across grades and across ages, no? So those are the components, and those are what we call big ideas, no? So anything, for example, that you do in reading should always be connected to one of those five big ideas, no? To really help kids learn to read better and comprehend what they read, no? So the question is like, how do we do it in social studies, no? Because in a way, it's not necessarily that it goes like you first do, learn phonemic awareness and phonics, and then you go into vocabulary. I mean, you can learn them together simultaneously, but there is a sequence, right? I mean, like phonics and decoding, if you kind of learn it a little bit in the sequence, it's going to be much more effective, than just kind of like throwing it in any time. No? But with social studies, it's kind of a little bit harder to kind of see this sequence, no? But what Cohen, Kaminui, and Karnine are suggesting is having these four kind of like major big ideas, overarching issues in social studies. One is problem-solution effects. The other one is multiple perspectives. So really knowing that, there are different views on a specific point. Factors of group success. So what is it that makes a group successful? And finally, environmental influences. So if you think about this as five big ideas, and then you think about your social studies lessons, thinking which of those ideas it is covering, it is going to be a little bit much easier than trying to, for example, find a book and say, oh, this book, is about community, so I'm going to teach this book, without it being connected then to another book or to another, experience through this overarching kind of concept of big idea, component. And so we're going to practice that today, and I'm going to go through what this four big ideas mean. The problem solution effects, no? And I know that in some of you in your videos, you actually did that. You actually talked about problems and solutions, which was very interesting and perfect for what I was trying to accomplish here. But so in social studies, there's always a problem, right? Like whether you don't get along with your peer, whether you did something that you were not supposed to do that was against the rules, social rules, whether we have a problem in the community with water or with heating or gas. I mean, there's always like a problem, right, that we are trying to solve, no? And how do we solve it is really based on this kind of like maybe five overarching principles, no? And one is like if you have a problem, for example, with your peers or in your community, you can move. So you can just kind of remove yourself from the problem. You can invent, you can make up something that might help, solve the problem. You can dominate and you can say, well, I don't care what others think, I'm going to do it my way. I know one of you had a video on the president, and one of the students had to decide on certain rules and laws, and some of them were totally kind of like off, and so the students said, well, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm the president, and nobody has a choice. So dominate. You can accommodate, you can say, well, okay, I don't agree, but I'll follow, because that's what the community does, or you can tolerate, and say, well, I can stand that person, but I'm going to try and be very far away from that person, but I'm going to still continue with my path, but there are always going to be effects, right? Any problem and any solution that you have to a problem will have an effect, and that effect can be sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes it can improve the situation, sometimes it can make it worse, or it doesn't change, but there will be always an effect, So one of the overarching ideas is this problem solution effect. And so, so the other one is the multiple perspectives, So you can always see events from very different perspectives. There's always another side to the story, I mean, even with the video that we just saw, right? Like, when it's an opinion, like one person likes the scraggy hair, the other one doesn't. I mean, and it's fair, right? We can all have our own opinions and we can all have different perspectives. So we have to think about that, and also make sure that students understand that, that if somebody has a different opinion, doesn't mean that they are less or their opinion is less worthy than the other one. It's just different. There was factors of group success. So what is it that makes a group successful? And there are four kind of like ideas. One is motivation. So you're motivated to change, right? You want to do something different. And here, for example, I can think about what you're doing right now. You're motivated to make a change, in your instruction and in your future, in your school for children. Leadership, here we have principals that come with you that provide you with the support. So there is leadership that is involved in making sure that you will be successful in what you do. Resources, right? We have a grant that supports this opportunity, to be here, to be learning, to be improving. And then capabilities, we have the intellectual capacity to make changes and we make the effort to come to the sessions on a Saturday at 8 o'clock in the morning and continue studying and discussing and thinking about it. So I think that if you think about success, that's what leads to success. When you have these things in place that will help you make a change. And finally, the environmental influences. So, and environmental influences, by this I'm thinking about, the weather, this week, there were some issues with the snow, and so they could have changed quite a bit of things. Like I kept communicating with Sharon and say, well, are we going? Are the flights changing? I kept getting these emails, the flights have been canceled to the Midwest, and to your flight to Las Vegas might not happen. I was like, well, let's see what happens. But so weather can change things too, even human interactions. Geography, right? Where you live and how your landscape has a huge effect also on how we deal with people and how we live, try to make sense of this environment. And then the community characteristics, how is our community, and what are the characteristics of this community? For example, when you were describing your classroom, there's a very diverse different types of classrooms, right? And so you have to take that into account. This is a list this is, unfortunately, we don't have, we don't have studies in elementary school in social studies, like research studies. So the only studies that have been done that are very rigorous, say have a control group and a treatment group, have been done in high school. And so I thought I would just invite the same researcher, Sharon Vaughn, and colleagues at the University of Texas at Austin. But this is the way she has some of the lessons. And so as you can see here, she has the subject matter, the big ideas that she wants to teach. And then she already provided all the the words, so she thought about the words that students would need in order to develop that lesson. And those are the words that then she talks about and teaches more in depth, no? And I thought that would be just a good example for you to have here. Now I want to show you just briefly the lesson that we did was for second grade, and then think about these principles that we talked about today, and see if you think they are there. If not, you can tell me too, because we can talk about it. But I think that one of the big ideas that I want to teach was precisely what makes a group successful, but also connected to the problem solution effect, idea. And so this topic was on Cesar Chavez, yeah. And the first thing we did was, in preparation for the study, we first looked at the standards to see what kind of words would be important to teach about, to present a lesson. And then we made certain different definitions, examples for these words. And then we developed a text around it that would make sense, so that when kids see the words, they see them in context and they can understand them. And the words that you see highlighted here are the words that we were going to teach more in depth, because we thought it would be important for the kids to know them in different circumstances. And when you think about hero, it's not like a word necessarily that they don't understand, but they always are connected, for example, with Superman, right? And so we wanted them to get deeper into that and see that heroes are not only Superman and Superwoman and Batman and all those things. So what I would like you to do is I volunteer to read the passage here, this first paragraph. Anybody would like to read it? Yeah, Terry? Yeah.
One of my heroes is Cesar Chavez. He is my hero because he helped farm workers and campesinos get more money for the hard work they did. Don't laugh at me, Don. He also helped them work in safe places because farm work is hard and people can get sick from the heat and pesticides. Heard that.
Thank you. Yeah, and you can see here that for example, we provided the Spanish for campesinos, so that in case some of the kids would not know really what a farm worker is. Not in Dallas, we kind of struggle. We don't find rural areas that they have seen lived in. So who can read the next paragraph? Yeah, Lisa.
Caesar got farm workers together to form a union. A union is a large group of people who work together to have one voice. By working as a union, all the farm workers talk with their bosses, FA, together. It is easier for a group of farm workers to talk to a boss than for one farm worker to talk to a boss.
So what is good about working together? So turn and talk and see what is good about working together.
Talk to the boss. Like the union, we have one voice. So when you're united, you have a common goal.
So how would you answer that question? Let's see, Sam and Stacy.
We said that it was easier for a large group of people to work together and speak with one voice to the boss than if they go one of it separately. Yeah.
So it makes it easier, right? More practical. Yeah. Yeah. What else? I heard also something here I thought was interesting.
It's less scary.
Exactly. Yeah, less scary, right? Yeah. Up north, any other thoughts? And let's see, Melinda. Yeah.
From the boss's perspective, is that he would be able to maybe understand a little bit more if there's multiple people saying it versus just one.
Exactly. Yeah. That would be much easier, for them to understand. It wasn't one person complaining, but it's a majority, many people complaining. Yeah, good. Good. And then we move on, and here, who would like to volunteer to read this? Sam, you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can't say that word though.
Cesar.
Caesar also showed farm workers how to get better pay by being polite. Caesar did not want farm workers to be mean to their bosses.
He did not want farm workers to fight, hit, or punch. Is that golpear or golpear?
Golpear.
Golpear, okay. He did not want them to use violence to get better pay.
So what are some examples of being polite? So turn and talk and think about examples of being polite.
Well, then, to fight it, yes.
Yes.
That's the opposite.
So, okay, so what would be some examples of being polite? Let's see up north there, Heidi.
Like just like holding the door open for someone, or using kind words like please and thank you, will you please pass, and doing thoughtful things for others.
Yeah, very good, exactly. And then here we could make connections with the students' real life, no? And so what is the example of being polite? Sharing, no, for example, or, you know, discussing something and not punching, no, like the kid here. Yeah. Very good point. And then we would continue with this activity, you know, following it up. But again, as you see, the words, the target words that we wanted to kind of teach more in depth, they are very strategically selected. And this one, for example, we selected it because it had a prefix. And so we wanted them to start learning also about prefixes and suffixes and things like that. But it all was in the context of this story. And then here, it's going to show people that talking about better than using violence. And then after many strides, farmers did get better pay and safe place to work. And you can read it here. I admire him because he was brave and used non-violent ways to make things better. He's my hero. And so the whole concept of hero, no, coming up. And then once we presented these words, we kind of started talking a little bit more broader. No? The author thinks that Cesar Chavez is a hero. Why do you think the author admires Cesar Chavez? And admire is one of the words that we were going to teach more in depth. Yeah. So again, you know, how would you answer this question and turn and talk and see what? Go ahead.
Perhaps his father was a farm worker.
All right, and so let's see what do you think, like up north, let's say Alicia, what do you think the author admires Cesar Chavez? What did you discuss?
We talked about, well, he got the job done, and he did it without having to resort to violence and getting anybody hurt.
Yes, exactly. No, so he got the job done. Yeah, and without getting anybody hurt. No, and so now, if we wanted to bring it to the big idea, right? What would be the big idea here? We could talk about problem-solution effect. No, there was a problem, there was injustice, and then the solution is to get together and to strike and to go and talk to without using violence. And the effect of it would be that things got changed, no, because of these many rules now farmers have much more protection, right? But we also can talk about Cesar Chavez as a leader, no, as a group successful leader, no, that was able to motivate everybody to make a change, no, and use the resources that he had to really help and the cognitive abilities, to really make a change in the community, no, and so this is an example of leadership that then we could, for example, connect it to what Sam you were talking about, no, like other heroes, no, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and it's the same concept, no, a leader trying to make a change in the community and what are the effects of that. Yeah, and you can see here, I mean, the cultural relevance is that it's a hero that is of Mexican origin and is also trying to do good things, just like we have a lot of other heroes that have tried that. No, there was a study that was done kind of looking at heroes for Hispanics versus, for example, African Americans, and what we found is that very few of the Hispanic heroes are really represented, although we have many. But so there's a little bit of an issue, because African Americans, like have at least examples or prototypes that they can draw from, and lots of literature that you can find. But it's very hard to find literature on Hispanic heroes. So another one that we had here that we used for was Eleanor Chua. And Eleanor Chua is an astronaut or a researcher that kind of a very strong, famous scientist. And so we use her as a hero. And then Sonia Sotomayor, who is kind of like a perfect example also of a good hero, But you kind of like have to look and really adapt and adjust, so it's not as easy to find information, which can also maybe reduce the cultural relevance sometimes of the things you select because of that. But so once students get involved in that, and the way we did it was that we wanted to present them with this context, with this text, with the knowledge and these questions. But then they went through a series of activities to build the vocabulary, and then at the end we asked them, they read the passage again and also the questions to see if they had improved their knowledge about Cesar Chavez, because we can't expect them. I mean, you guys, know obviously, but for second graders, it would be hard for them to grasp the information the first time. I mean, even thinking about striking, and unions, and farm workers, and I mean, it would be all very foreign. So that was kind of the way to present information, but then we built on that. So one of the things we built on was precisely a vocabulary that we had already identified as important, and it was like hero, admire, brave, and we had a few others too that we thought they could talk about with any other hero, that they would select. And one of the things we did was first, we kind of like try to even have them use the word, And so here, the word we're going to learn today is admire. The syllables in admire are admire. Now here's how you spell the word. And now you read the word aloud. What is it? Admire. Yeah. So admire means to respect, to like and respect someone. What does admire mean? To like and respect someone. To like and respect someone. Yes. Now, let me give you some examples of admire. I admire Cesar Chavez because he showed farm workers how to work together and get better pay. Another example is, I admire Tommy de Paola, who writes and illustrates children's books because he did not give up on his dream of becoming an artist. My grandfather always repairs my bike when I see him. I admire him because he knows which tools to use to fix different parts of my bike. Now, admire means to like and respect someone. What does admire mean?
To like and respect someone.
Yes, and if you were to use admire in your sentence, what does admire mean? Admire means? Good, exactly. So just making sure that students are also saying that word, not just the definition, but also saying the actual word. Yep. Now, select a picture that is an example of admire. And, if kids can't read, you would read the multiple choice questions. If they can, then you can let them decide. And so what is the best example of admire?
I applaud Yo-Yo Mom for his talent to play the cello.
Yeah. So good. Now turn and talk and explain to your partner why you selected B.
Because playing my admire is very difficult.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So I heard that I admire Yo-Yo Ma because it's very difficult to play the cello. Yeah. What else did anybody say? Why do they admire? Is there why Yo-Yo Ma is an example of admire?
We were going with process of elimination. If Lewis says bad things, we don't like that. We wouldn't respect him.
And hearing that Jose wants to play soccer with us tonight is great, but that's not admiring, whereas, I know that a cello is a hard instrument to play.
Uh-huh. Yes. Well, this is an excellent example that I've also seen in the in this project that I'm doing precisely with the girls using that, is that some of the girls, and it can be boys too, but some of the kids, they were really processing, like doing that process of elimination, like very verbally overt, while others don't do it, right? But teaching them how to do that is really good for language, and at the same time you really kind of like develop and understand their thinking process, no? And that's not something that's something we do with English learners, because, they just kind of say the end response, but we want them to go through that, no?
I think I do it a little more. Like I teach my kids to go through a process of elimination because a lot of our high stakes testing is vocabulary, and there's no way I can cover every single vocabulary word that's going to be on that test. Yes, I can pick up the ones that are going to be there, those 2-tier words like compare and contrast and infer, like those words. But if they can figure out process of elimination, that admire, if I can teach, saying bad things, I don't know. To me, I see a value in teaching process of elimination, at least in some sort of sense, because we do so much with high stakes testing that I know personally there's no way I can teach all of those vocabulary words on a test. I can do my best to get a bunch of them, but if I can teach them the skills to figure it out, they can get some of those questions right by going through, well, saying bad things, that's not nice, and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, no, really good point. But I think that even, thinking about students develop their language, that's the way they can develop their language, without you providing everything, like the whole output, input. They can build it from these examples, And so that's a really good way of also addressing the language objectives, yeah. Exactly, and here would be another example. So again, we could see, which ones you select and then turn and talk and explain why. And that way you would again have a conversation, and students would already be able to see the words, or if you read them, then they can use that to build their language. Yeah, so it's not just like in a vacuum. It's the same thing with sentence frames that I've heard you say, like I admire him because. So if you can give them that, then it would be much easier for them to fill in the rest of the blanks. Yeah. So here's another activity, one where they build sentences, and that can kind of build like syntax for students. So we have in the way we put 3 columns. And so in the second column, students have to determine whether it's admire or do not admire, and then a series of examples, And that way, when they say a sentence, they are saying a sentence is grammatically correct, and it helps them with that syntax, building the syntax, We call this activity building sentences, And then we always have like a language extension where, for example, it's cognates. In this case, admire in a way, it's a cognate. I mean, at least written, not auditorily, but written is a cognate. So we could talk about cognates in Spanish and in English, And then we explain what a cognate is. It's something that look alike in English and Spanish and have the same meaning in the 2 languages. And then we provide them with a series of first the example here, admire, admirar, and then we kind of have a list of examples that they can then cross-check and see and explain why they think they would be cognates or not. And this one, even if they speak Spanish, for example, with each other, it's a perfect way to also practice their Spanish and kind of like, particularly their deeper thinking, using their native language. Yeah. Now show me what you know. And in this, it's kind of like almost like we call it an assessment, but here we have a series of examples, and students have to determine, and they are kind of like connected to real life, and they have to select the one that in this case will be the best one. So I admire the principal in my school because, why would you choose now that we have principals here? what would you like them to say, your students to say?
To do that. That's why I picked that one.
Twice a day.
Well, this is a good example too, because we get a lot of the stuff in 3rd grade having to deal with the SBACs coming up, where they ask, what is the best example And so all of these could be correct. You could say any of these, but this is a good one to talk about. All right, so why would one of these be a better choice than the others?
Exactly. So that's exactly the purpose of this lesson, of this activity. That we don't want, it's not really that there is a correct answer, right? You want to admire a principal for all this, but it's how they express the language. So why do you think A is the correct answer? And then they have to express themselves. And so in a natural way, they're already developing language, because they have to defend their position. And somebody else could have a different position. And so there would be like a good example of multiple perspectives, right? To just right there, yeah. Yeah, so sometimes it's okay to put answers that might have different options, so the students learn the multiple perspectives concept, and also that they can express themselves and not fear like, oh, there's the correct answer, because the multiple choice in general is like there's only one correct answer. Well, in this case, there's not necessarily. Yeah. Yeah, and then here, this is another one that is important. That we used where we say a sentence and students have to say if it's an example of the target word, in this case admire or not. So for example here, I respect my teacher because she taught herself how to read. Do you admire her or not? Yes. Liz? Yes, yeah, yeah, and then the natural question would be why exactly, and so with the why you already are pushing the kids to also express themselves, in the best way they can. And so we provided like a series of activities like that. I dislike when my brother teases me. Is this an example of admire or not? No, exactly. Why? And then again, and then going back to the sharing and then kind of getting along and things like that. I look up to Ella because she was the first Hispanic woman to travel to space. Yes, and then why again? And then we finish that. And then we can finish with the concept of admire. So what does admire mean? Like respect someone. Yes, yeah. So if you count all the activities, about approximately how many activities did we use for this word?
Can
At least about
everything that we did, right? Can we kind of walk through sequentially and kind of
yes,
say
yeah. Yeah, and we're going to be yeah. I think I have it in the next slide.
It's in the debriefing slide.
Debriefing. Okay. Debriefing. Yeah. So exactly. Thank you, Tracy. You're thinking about the ahead of me. Yeah. So what kind of activities do we include? So we can see word repetition, right? The students had many opportunities to repeat the word according to experts in vocabulary like Margaret McKeown, Margaret McCowan, and Isabel Beck. You have to expose students about 14 to 16 times to a word in order for them to really acquire it and teach it in depth. So think about how many opportunities you have for your students to teach and to hear the specific word, not those target words that you want them to teach in depth, that you want to teach in depth, yeah. So word repetition, then we have student-friend definition, right? I mean, admire means to like and respect someone, so it's a definition that, a kindergarten can understand, first grade or two. Examples and non-examples, right? So we want to always kind of like be, kind of like showing the non-example, could be an antonym, but could be like something that is slightly different, but you would not consider admire, like we had here. Then discrimination, students have to discriminate whether this is an example of admire or not, and the example with yo-yo ma and would be one of them. Building sentences, yeah. Language extensions, that in this case it was cognates. And then what I call assessment, but it's really more like trying students to develop their language, their academic language with that. Yeah. Yeah, so those are, so if you think exactly, you were talking about about 6, 7 activities with lots of examples and lots of opportunities for students to interact and to talk. And that same thing, we did the same kind of process, this exactly same type of activities with all the other words we want them to teach in this. So the system is already there, and it was just a matter of thinking about, okay, what is the best student-friend definition and the examples and things like that. I think that if you think about this big idea concept, social studies, if you do it one time for your year, you can then reuse it or the next year. So it doesn't have to be like always recreating things, because that's the hard part too for teachers, like you don't have time to be recreating activities, and particularly vocabulary activities, because they are difficult to do. I mean, they take a bit of time to build. It's good if you have partners that can do that together, and that way, everybody can share that, the activities and the examples, no? Here's another one that also Sharon Vaughn and colleagues did, and this one was based on the history lessons, social studies lessons in high school, but I'm giving it to you so that you also can see another option of a lesson. All right, so, yeah, Alicia, yeah.
Something that's really cool is that our English language program that we're using this year, or that we started, it actually comes with vocabulary cards, and they have that exact one on that slide you just went through. It has that exact process on there. So we're able to do that with the 8 vocabulary words, and then they read them in the stories all week long, and there's activities to do with them, and so it's kind of cool to have that ready to go.
Oh yeah, that's definitely an advantage, exactly. Yeah, if you have it like that, yeah, that's perfect, yes, yeah. Yeah, and it's a very generalizable kind of set of activities, no, that you can use, yeah. Well, it's fantastic to have it, but I don't know, yeah. What is the program that you're using, Alicia?
Read Wonders.
Wonders.
Read Wonders,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
That's the one we analyzed in your book.
Oh, I'm talking about that, yes, yeah, okay. All right, yeah. Yeah, and you found, though, they had enough activities,
Yeah, they
right?
did,
But
yeah.
there was an issue, I think. Was there an issue with the activities that they provided?
Well, the grade level, the vocabulary was above grade level, which can be a good thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I thought it was pretty rich, though.
It is very rich, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and one of the things that I pointed out to them is that there aren't thematic units per se. They instead highlight topics that are staggered. They're not kind of
yeah.
combined in a way that
Yeah.
make it more rich, yeah.
Yeah, so that
And
integration.
that's the one thing that we found too, all of us going through it, is just like, okay, we need to rearrange this a little bit to make it more topically centered.
Yeah.
A lot of the activities that they suggest specifically to keep enhancing the vocabulary are kind of your boring, typical worksheet things. But through a lot of our classes with this program, I've learned a lot of other ones, and so I do those instead of the ones they give us. But I still like this introductory method of getting the words out there and talking about them, and then we can keep hitting them and going through it.
Yes, exactly. Like just having a framework, no, or a background, and then you can build on the activities and make them more interesting, no. And videos and visuals always help a lot, and to make something more exciting.
Oh no, I remember what the finding was that so the follow-up, the post-reading activities weren't very rich. That's what it was. They did a lot of pre-reading and during reading, but nothing to follow up to kind of revisit those words again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things I think almost every program has a problem with that, no? That post or after reading is in the review. Remember the judicial review? That's what sometimes tends to be missing in programs, no? That, okay, we taught these words, okay, let's move on, and then you never revisit them.
Again, yeah.
And it's an issue, no, that you want to take into account. Particularly, that's why I think that those big ideas concept pushes you almost naturally to review all the material, no, because you want to keep them in present. No, yeah, Liz, yeah.
I use a program for intervention called Voyager Passports,
Mm-hmm.
and it does a lot of the like, okay, here's the word, the definition is, what's the definition? Use it in a sentence. This means, and then I mean, there's not very many visuals, and I don't know if it's just the like adventure that I'm on, and I'm only specifically teaching like one thing. The group that I'm using it with is a lot higher, like they're in the higher levels of it, but they have to be like, yes, this is a good sentence, or no, this is not used correctly. So for at least for vocabulary, they also do it, I know, with my low group for even just regular words that they're reading. So
yeah, at least you have a base, no? Because
Yeah,
does it provide the student-friendly definitions? Because that's really hard.
So like we just did a lesson that was trying to think, because it's been a few days since I've done it with my group, because I don't see them. The group that I do it with, I don't see them every single day. But they did, the word was, I don't know, it was a student-friendly definition, and so it was twirled. She twirled in her living room, so it was like spun around in a circle. And so the definition was, I twirled across my living room, and the kids said yes, and then the next sentence I gave him was like, the dog twirled to get the treat or something like that. And it was supposed to be no, because it talked about a girl like spinning in a circle. So it kind of, I mean, it was, but they were supposed to easily distinguish that, yes, that's the correct definition, or no, that's not the correct definition. Use it with a partner. And then I think at the end of the unit, they do have to match up some of the vocabulary words when I assess them.
Yeah, yeah. So it is a little bit of a base, but you have to definitely, I mean, that's what I found with vocabulary programs, know that they do have the base, they provide sometimes the student definition, but then sometimes the discrimination examples are not quite clear, or there are not enough activities or not enough visuals to really kind of like get in depth, no? And that's what I think you can build on, no? Yeah. So this is exactly what we're going to be doing. But just to kind of like summarize it, I don't know what did this. I can know myself from the slides. Okay. Oh yeah. So going back to the lesson, no. So you can see that. I mean, we did talk about big ideas, no, which would be like successful grouping and leadership, and also more problem solution effect, no. Yeah. Then we have conspicuous strategies. No, we're connecting it always to that big idea. We have made scaffolding. No, so we scaffolded the instruction by providing the examples, and then also the words in depth. There was strategic integration. No, like we integrated information with. I mean, we could integrate this information with other heroes. No, like in this case, we used like Tommy de Paola or Eleanor Chu or things like that. And then we developed the building background knowledge, like with the text, with lots of pictures and visuals. Know that that's what you want to do too, if you can, yeah. And then we had, like the idea with the review is that we would present this again to students, and then have them, not the words, but then have them rethink and kind of get deeper into the text. And we will do it with several different heroes or famous people, so that they can review that big idea and the words they learned.